The season does not announce itself all at once. The morning still arrives softly over rooftops and telephone wires. Feeders continue swinging gently in suburban gardens. Sparrows scatter beneath parked cars. Finches cling to dry summer weeds as if nothing has changed. To most people, the world outside still feels stable, but something has already begun. A bird lands at the feeder, eats for several seconds, then immediately returns again and again. Tiny bodies that normally feed in short bursts now consume food with startling urgency, as if time itself has become limited. Across wetlands and forests, familiar routines begin shifting almost invisibly. Some species grow quieter, others gather into loose flocks weeks before departure. The air itself starts feeling unsettled, though no obvious danger can yet be seen. The migration has not started, not officially, but inside their bodies, the crisis is already underway. As daylight slowly shortens, hormones begin moving through their nervous systems with astonishing precision. Appetite intensifies, fat storage accelerates, sleep patterns begin changing. Even captive birds kept far from weather and landscapes often become restless during this period, reacting to seasonal signals buried deep within biology itself. Scientists call part of this behavior zoogunrua, migratory restlessness. At night, birds that would normally remain calm begin fluttering, shifting, unable to fully settle. In the wild, entire populations grow increasingly alert after sunset, as though responding to instructions carried silently inside the dark. Because migration does not begin with flight. It begins with anticipation. And anticipation is dangerous. Every extra gram of fat now accumulating beneath feathers may soon determine whether a bird survives crossing open ocean, mountain ranges, deserts, or violent storm systems. Many of these animals weigh less than a handful of coins. Yet within weeks, some will attempt journeys stretching thousands of kilometers through conditions capable of killing them in a single night. The calm scenes people associate with early autumn are hiding bodies preparing for biological extremes. And the preparation itself comes with risk. Feeding too little can mean starvation later. Leaving too early exposes birds to unstable weather. Leaving too late may close critical migration windows entirely. Even now, before the first major movement begins, survival is already balancing on timing precise enough to collapse from the smallest disruption. Still, the neighborhoods remain quiet. Children walk to school beneath trees filled with birds, preparing for impossible distances. Evening light settles across backyards while flocks gather silently along power lines. Above cities, marshes, coastlines, and empty fields, millions of living creatures are entering one of the most physically demanding phases of their entire existence. Most humans never notice the transition. They only notice the absence later, when the sky finally empties. But before that silence arrives, another transformation unfolds first, one hidden inside muscle, blood, instinct, and bone. The transformation deepens quietly. From a distance, the birds still appear delicate, light enough to bend thin branches, small enough to disappear into grass and shadow. But beneath feathers and hollow bones, their bodies are beginning to reorganize themselves for survival. The shortening days trigger chemical changes with extraordinary precision. Hormones released in response to fading light begin altering appetite, metabolism, and energy storage almost simultaneously. Birds that once fed casually now eat with relentless focus, sometimes nearly doubling their body weight in a matter of days, not because food is abundant, because soon it may disappear entirely. In forests, warblers move constantly through leaves, searching for insects from dawn until near darkness. Shorebirds probe mudflats without pause as tides shift beneath them. Hummingbirds visit flowers in frantic repetition, consuming enough energy each day to sustain journeys that seem physically impossible for something so small. To human eyes, it can look peaceful, but biologically, these animals are entering controlled stress. Fat begins accumulating beneath the skin in pale yellow layers dense with stored energy. Flight muscles strengthen. Organs associated with digestion temporarily enlarge to process extraordinary food intake. Some species even reduce the size of less immediately necessary internal systems before departure, minimizing weight for the journey ahead. The bird itself is becoming temporary. Its body reshapes around migration. Every adjustment serves a single purpose: endurance. Because once departure begins, there may be no opportunity to rest safely for days. Some species will cross entire oceans without landing once. Others will fly above deserts where exhaustion leaves nowhere to descend. Tiny songbirds weighing less than an ounce may travel through freezing rain, violent headwinds, and darkness dense enough to erase every visible landmark below them. And all of that survival depends on preparation happening now, hidden in ordinary places humans pass every day. At backyard feeders, birds compete more aggressively than usual. In wetlands, flocks cluster tightly around shrinking food sources. Across northern forests, young birds born only months earlier must somehow prepare for journeys they have never seen before, guided almost entirely by inherited instinct. There is no rehearsal, no second attempt. A single mistimed migration can end in starvation long before winter arrives. And increasingly, the environment surrounding them is becoming harder to predict. Unstable temperatures confuse seasonal signals. Drought alters food availability. Sudden storms force birds to burn precious reserves before reaching critical stopover locations. The margin between survival and collapse grows thinner each year, yet the feeding continues. Again and again, tiny hearts driving bodies toward physical limits most humans will never witness closely enough to understand. Because migration is not simply movement across geography. It is a full-body survival state. And before the sky fills with departure, another instinct is beginning to awaken. One tied not to daylight, but to darkness itself. Then the nights begin to change. The same birds that spent daylight feeding in gardens and wetlands grow strangely alert after sunset. Movement continues long after the landscape falls silent. Beneath moonlight, silhouettes shift along branches instead of settling into rest. Something inside them is pulling upward. In laboratory studies, migratory birds placed inside enclosed spaces often begin fluttering obsessively during the exact seasons their wild counterparts would depart. Even without open skies above them, they react to an ancient internal timing mechanism impossible to fully silence. Scientists call it zuganrua, migratory restlessness, a state where sleep begins breaking apart under the pressure of instinct. Tiny hearts accelerate. Wings tremble against still air. Directional behavior emerges with startling consistency, as though invisible maps have suddenly activated inside the nervous system itself. Because migration does not rely on memory alone. It relies on orientation systems so complex they still challenge human understanding. Some birds navigate using stars rotating above the Earth. Others detect polarized light lingering after sunset. Many appear capable of sensing the planet's magnetic field through specialized biological mechanisms embedded somewhere within their bodies, allowing them to follow routes across continents with astonishing accuracy. And most of this movement happens at night. Darkness offers calmer air, lower temperatures, fewer predators. Under cover of black sky, millions of birds rise almost invisibly into atmospheric corridors humans rarely notice from the ground. Entire migrations pass overhead while cities sleep, but the night sky these instincts evolved within no longer exists as it once did. Across modern landscapes, artificial light floods upward from highways, office towers, industrial zones, and suburban streets. Glass buildings reflect stars that are not real. Communication towers pulse through fog and cloud cover like traps suspended in darkness. And for migrating birds, confusion can become fatal within seconds. Each year, countless birds spiral toward illuminated structures after losing their natural orientation. Some circle endlessly until exhaustion overtakes them. Others collide directly with windows they cannot perceive against reflected sky. The danger is especially cruel because the same instinct guiding migration toward survival can also guide birds into catastrophe. Still, they continue rising, over coastlines, across rivers, through invisible currents of cold autumn air. Young birds making their first migration launch into darkness carrying directions written entirely by evolution. They have never seen the destinations ahead of them, never crossed the mountains or oceans waiting beyond the horizon. Yet somehow, night after night, they move with extraordinary determination toward places their species has traveled for thousands of years. And above the earth, the migration begins unfolding in silence. Not graceful from every angle, not peaceful, but tense, precise, fragile. A living system balanced on timing and orientation so delicate that even slight disruption can ripple across entire journeys. Because soon, another threat begins tightening around them. Not from predators, not from exhaustion, but from time itself. Migration is governed by timing more than distance. A bird can survive brutal weather, exhausting winds, even injury, but if it arrives too early or too late, the landscape itself may no longer sustain it. That is the hidden precision beneath migration. Across continents, entire journeys are synchronized with temporary bursts of life that appear and vanish within narrow seasonal windows. Insects emerge for only brief periods. Wetlands flood and recede. Coastal feeding grounds become productive for days, sometimes weeks, before conditions shift again. Migrating birds move through these changing environments, almost like travelers following disappearing doors. For generations, evolution aligned these patterns with remarkable accuracy. Birds departing northern forests could arrive precisely as caterpillars reached peak abundance. Shorebirds crossing oceans would encounter tidal ecosystems dense with food at exactly the moment their depleted bodies required recovery. The system was never random. It was calculated through survival across thousands of years. But now the calculations are becoming unstable. Warmer temperatures alter spring emergence patterns before many birds can arrive. Sudden heat waves dry wetlands earlier than expected. Storm systems intensify along traditional flyways, forcing exhausted migrants off course or trapping them in dangerous conditions without food. And migration leaves very little room for error. One severe storm can force flocks to burn energy reserves meant for crossing entire regions still waiting ahead. Drought can erase stopover habitats that generations once depended on with absolute consistency. The danger compounds quietly because the birds themselves continue responding to instincts shaped by older environmental rhythms increasingly disrupted by rapid ecological change. In northern forests, some species now begin migration preparations while temperatures still feel deceptively warm. Along coastlines, food availability fluctuates unpredictably beneath changing ocean conditions. Even wind patterns, once relatively stable guides for migration, have become less reliable in certain regions. And still, the birds must decide when to leave. Too early and sudden cold may destroy food sources before they reach safety. Too late, and winter advances faster than their bodies can outrun it. Every migration becomes a negotiation with uncertainty. This is why the feeding before departure feels so desperate, why flocks gather with such urgency, why migratory restlessness intensifies night after night as instinct pushes against narrowing environmental windows. Because the journey ahead is not only dangerous, it is timed. A fragile biological equation balancing weather, geography, food, energy, daylight, and survival simultaneously across enormous distances. And somewhere above forests darkening into autumn, millions of birds are already committing themselves to that equation without knowing whether the world waiting ahead still matches the one their instincts were built to find. Soon, the cost of getting it wrong becomes impossible to hide. Migration is often remembered through beautiful images. Birds crossing orange autumn skies, vast formations moving peacefully over lakes and mountains, the sense of freedom carried in wings disappearing toward distant horizons. But from inside the migration itself, survival feels very different. For many birds, the journey becomes a prolonged state of exhaustion, balanced only barely against death. Far offshore, tiny songbirds continue flying through darkness with nowhere to land beneath them. Hour after hour, wings beat against cold air, while energy reserves steadily disappear inside bodies already pushed close to their physical limit. A sudden storm can force them downward into open water, where survival ends almost immediately.